What's going on, quaranTEAM? Shooting Dave here. So good to see your faces. I hope you're all having a great week. Now today we're going to do a tutorial. We're going to do a film technique that I really am a big fan of. It's called the zoom Dolly effect, or the Zolly, or Vertigo effect. It has many different names and it's super cool. But what is it, you might ask? Well, it's this. Now, this technique was first made famous by Alfred Hitchcock in the film Vertigo. It's since been used in tons and tons of different productions like Jaws, Lord of the Rings, Top Gear, you name it. And it's a super cool and interesting technique. So, how do you do it? Well, what you want to do is zoom in or out as you dolly the camera forwards or backwards, and it causes this like weird 3D parallax effect, and it's super cool and super interesting. Now typically you need a lot of equipment to do this. You'll need a track so that you can dolly your camera in and out. You'll need a focus puller because you're also going to be changing focal length whilst you're doing it. So it's quite involved and very difficult to do by yourself. However, I'm going to show you guys how to do it inside Davinci Resolve. Now, it is so incredibly simple inside Davinci Resolve, you won't believe it. So, if this sounds like the kind of video you'd like, then please do consider smashing that subscribe button. You really will make my day. Okay, so first of all, we need to have something that we can edit. So, I'm going to hand over to Shooting Dave. Thank you, Editing Dave. Shooting Dave here. Right, so this is my setup. I've got some bottles of beer right here, I've got the camera here, and I'm using a rag or some cloth. And the only reason why I'm doing that is so I get a nice smooth movement over the work surface. If you use your skin, you'll start to drag and it'll stick into some certain places, and you don't really want that. You want the movement to be as smooth as possible. I don't own a gimbal, I don't have a slider, I don't have any of that, so I'm going to have to do this all handheld, so that's why using some fabric to get it as smooth as possible. So, this is the setup. I'm going to go and grab a couple of shots now, and then we'll hand back over to Editing Dave. So I've got my start point here. I'm going to hit record, let the camera settle a little bit, and then I'm going to nice and calmly drag it out. I'll push back in. So I'm using my body weight to pull back with on the shot rather than using my hands and snatching the camera. I'm trying to allow my body weight and use my arms in a locked formation, so I'm just pulling the camera back with my body weight rather than snatching the camera. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that'll be a nice smooth effect. Don't know right now because I can't really tell on the back of the camera until we get into post and I can see how it looks. But yeah, that's my shooting setup. Hopefully it works. Right now I think I'm going to crack open the beer and hand back over to Editing Dave. Okay, done with the props now, so back to Editing Dave. Cheers. Thank you, Shooting Dave, although you could have at least saved me one of those beers. Okay, so let's jump into Davinci Resolve. So, you've got your clip on your timeline, you've trimmed it, so you've only got the portion that you want. Now, for this clip, we are nice and close, so we're dollied right up to the bottles of beer, or whatever subject you decided to shoot, and then I slowly pull away. Now, you only need one movement for this, because you can also like reverse the clip and duplicate it. I'll get onto that in a minute. So, the main thing we want to do to really sell home this effect is keep the subject matter roughly the same size at the beginning and the end of the frame. Now, to do that, there's a couple of ways you can do it, and the way I like to do it is I like to go up to the effects library, grab a solid colour, and then dump it over the top of our clip. Trim that so it's the same length. Now, obviously you're not going to see anything through that because it's solid right now, so just drop the opacity of the solid colour. So click on the clip and come over to the inspector and drop the opacity down. Anything will work really, just so you can see through it. We're not actually going to use it, so it's just a guide really. So I've gone for about 50%, and then you scroll down, and what you want to do is you want to crop or resize this box so it acts as a guide, so you can basically put it around your subject and then work out how big and how much you need to zoom in your clip. So I'm just going to crop this into the left, something around here, and onto the right, about here. I'm going to crop the top down, about there, and the bottom as well. Okay, so now we know roughly how big our beard needs to remain in the frame. Now, before we do anything else, it's probably a good idea to stabilize the footage. Now, a word of the wise here, don't stabilize it too much because it's going to move the position and change the scale of your bottles of beer or whatever subject you decided to shoot. So to do that, just come over to the color tab, make sure you got your clip selected. Option S adds another serial node in its place, and then we're going to come to tracker and window and change this to stabilize. And I like to use similarity. I find this is the best one. So just click stabilize and it'll run through and stabilize that clip for you. And that'll just take out any of the micro jitter. Because I don't have a slider or anything like that, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a perfect track forwards and back. There's going to be a bit of side to side. So this kind of helps minimize that effect really. Right, now we're done. Let's go back to our clip. Check the size of our reference box so we can see it's changed a little bit, so we need to reduce the amount of cropping on the top of that and reduce the amount on the bottom as well. Okay, now click on your actual clip, and what you want to do is you want to add some keyframes to your zoom and transform, because that is what we're going to be using to control our footage. So add a transform on here and on here, and then we come to the end of our clip. Now you can see that we're much further away from the bottles of beer, and we want to basically punch in so that it fills that box up again. So simply just come over to zoom and roughly line it up, so we need to come down a bit. Now you don't have to be perfect when doing this, but the better you are with it, the more it will be convincing. So you really do want to pay attention to how big your subject is in the frame. So I'm going to go in here. Now previously I did this by the width, but I'm actually going to do it by the height this time. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, and then we need to come up. So the bottle, and we're too big here, so we'll just back it out a little bit. Drop it down. Okay, let's disable our solid color clip, and let's just have a playback and see how that's looking. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. So if you wanted, you can just render that straight out of there, but what I like to do is actually delete this solid color. We're going to re-enable that one, and what I like to do is convert this into a compound clip. So we're going to call this beer bottle 1, and what I'm going to do is drag it up by pressing option, so that will duplicate that clip, and then I'm going to come over to here and go to change clip speed. I'm going to hit reverse speed and hit change. So this way we've got it going in and we've got it going out, so you can set this up to repeat. And what I like to do is put my playhead at the end of the clip, come back one frame, and then line up the other clip with that. So that way you don't get a duplication of one frame, so it'll go constantly in and out. So if we play this back now, let's have a look how this looks. So yeah, pretty simple. That's all there is to it. All you're doing is basically making sure that your object in the frame remains the same size at the beginning and the end of the clip. And that movement backwards and forwards will change the field of view of your background, thus giving you that vertigo effect. Now it's super simple and really quite enjoyable. I love this effect. I've used it a couple of times. But how do you make it better? Well, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can add some foreground interest. So I did one with a bottle of syrup when we had pancakes the other day. So I had a plate, my mug of tea in there, and then the syrup in the middle of the frame. And that way, as you're moving backwards and forwards, you can really still see things stretching in and out, and it's a super cool look. Another way you could improve it is to invest in some equipment. So get something like a slider. That way you can get a perfectly smooth and perfectly linear dolly backwards and forwards. You could even motorize it as well, so you can get repeatable effects if you didn't get it the way you wanted. So that way you could experiment with different speeds and different ramp actions. That'd be pretty cool. Personally, I don't like using speed ramps when doing this. I prefer it as a linear movement. I feel like the effect is much more convincing that way. However, if you want to try using speed ramps, that's something you guys can play around with. Now, as Shooting Dave mentioned, I was shooting in 1080p. Now, if you want to improve this look, then by far is more recommended to use 4K. That way you have much more resolution and you're not throwing away so many pixels, and you're not degrading the image quality by cropping into 1080p. So 4K would be another way that you can make this look better. When I fly the drone, it's 2.7K, so at least I have some more latitude there to crop in. I'm not throwing away as many pixels as I would be on my Canon M50. Okay, so guys, that is all there is to it. I showed you how to do it, and basically the secret is just make sure that your subject is as big at the beginning of the frame as it is at the end of the frame. Then make sure that you keep a nice, smooth and linear movement with your camera, and try and keep the subject in the center of the frame. And that really does help selling that vertigo, zoom, dolly, Zolly, whatever you want to call it, effect. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Got any comments or questions, let me know down below. If you haven't followed me on Instagram, I am @ShootingDave. And if you could subscribe to this channel, you'd make my day. And as always, guys, I shall see you in the next one. See ya.